Assalamalaikum everyone, and a very good afternoon. Welcome to yet another episode of Perceptive Learning Zone. And today we are going to talk a bit more about the report. Today we will be uh, specifically be focusing on the bar chart report because I'm getting some queries that students are often feeling a bit bogged down in that. So I'm going to go over this through an example and see how we can sort of decode this mystery, right? So over here, as you can see, fellas, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So hopefully you all have access to it. So what we see in front of us is this is basically what a bar chart looks like, okay? So you got a x-axis over here that has 5 categories labeled: cars, computers, books, perfume, and cameras, right? And the two different colors, as you can see over here, the orange color corresponds to data for United Kingdom, whereas the section in blue corresponds to details that have been annotated for France. On the y-axis, you have values, mathematical numbers starting from 0, going all the way up to 500,000. And they show what the expenditure of these two countries, France and UK, on the consumer goods in 2010. And the unit is what? That is pounds sterling. Okay. So we try to read the question first of all, right? Try to understand what is happening over here. Question: the chart above, the bar chart above, shows the expenditure of two countries on consumer goods in 2010. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Right. So as I said before, fellas, when it comes to a graph, okay, you can always mention the axis in the bar chart introduction. Just remember a basic rule back that you studied back in economics, that the independent variable is compared on the x-axis, or this is also a mathematical concept. X-axis is where you populate the independent variable, and dependent variables, you put that on the y-axis, okay? Now, obviously, as you guys know, in a report introduction is just paraphrasing the background question statement. Hopefully, you should have a basic idea of how to do that by now. However, when we talk about the overview, that is quintessentially speaking, a summary of the key points and encapsulation of the main overall features of the report, what can we mention, right? So when it comes to a bar chart, like in this case, you can in the overview, you can talk about, you can mention the maximum and minimum values of both variables, right? So for example, let's say we have two variables in this case. One is France and the other is United Kingdom. So if we just zoom it in a little bit more, as you can see that UK is clearly, that is in orange, is clearly having the most expenditure for cars. That is approximately 450,000 pounds sterling. Now, why do I say approximately? Because these are approximate values, right? You can't say exactly it's 450,000. It could be 455. It could be 452. It could be 457. So you have to give an estimation when it comes to that, right? So that is a maximum value for UK. Similarly, UK spends the minimum expenditure, that is south of 150,000 pounds sterling on perfumes. If you talk about France, clearly it is spending the most amount of money on cars once again, and it is spending the least amount of money on cameras, right? You can also, what you can do is, if you come to the second point, explain which variable exceeds the other one on a holistic scale. I repeat, explain which variable exceeds the other one on a holistic scale. This is the overview of the report that we're talking about, right? Now, what do I mean by this sentence, okay? Let's say, fellas, let's just talk about UK first, okay? I got 5 categories in orange. Let's try to add up all their values on an approximate basis. So you got 450,000 cars in UK approximately, okay? You got 350,000, right? So that is going to be 800,000. You got books, that is 400,000. You add that becomes 1,200,000. Then you got 150,000, that is 350,000, and you got cameras, that is sort of 1,650, 1,700,000, right? Now, if you do the same drill for France in blue, you have this column for cars, for computers, for books, for perfume, for cameras. You look at the highest value, and you add up all the 5 sections to get the total expenditure of France in 2010 for all these combined items. You have 400 plus sort of 375 plus 300 plus 200 plus 150,000. So it's clearly going to be less, right? So you can say that France's expenditure overall is less than that of the United Kingdom, or the expenditure of the United Kingdom overall is more than that of France when it comes to these consumer goods in 2010, right? Now, what you could also do is you could group the information together. You could be very smart and very concise when it comes to this, right? Because, like I say, that quality transfer, quality and time management is very vital. So, as I can see over here, in the case of cars, France and UK both have the greatest amount of expenditure, right? So we can collectively say that France and UK, it was noted that France and UK spent the most amount on cars in 2010. And similarly, you can also talk about, if you go to the third point of the overview, you can talk about the minimum and maximum deviation between the two variables regarding one entity. For example, I would say that the difference between the expenditures of France and UK, this difference is maximum for cameras, and it is the minimum for what? The difference between the two expenditures is the bare minimum for computers. You can also calculate it approximately, right? So these are some interesting observations through which you can have a very, creative insight in how to, decode this data and spot out some main pictures out of it, right? So this is how you can go about the overview. And obviously, the body paragraph is where you go in details. You give descriptive information. France spend this much. You can spend this much. Go on each of those categories and details. So hopefully, you have a basic understanding of what I'm trying to establish over here. So once again, let's read the question. Then let's see how we're going to go about answering it. Question: the chart above shows the expenditure of two countries on consumer goods in 2010. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So we start off basically, obviously, we just talked about the overview of the bar chart. Okay, you could mention maximum, minimum values of both variables, explain which variable exceeds the other one on a holistic scale, talk about the minimum and maximum deviation between two variables regarding one entity, right? That's what you are supposed to put in the overview, right? Recommended, preferentially speaking, of course. So vocabulary for accurate data. Now, guys, let's look at 2010 perfumes, okay? How much do we have for UK, the one in orange, that is close to 150,000. Now, let's look at the statement that I've written over here. UK's expenditure on perfumes was 150,000 pounds sterling in 2010. This is wrong, okay? Because as you can see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit over here again, right? If you see here perfumes, right, it's not really hitting the 150,000 mark. It's slightly below. So how can you say it is 150,000? I mean, would you say that 100 is the same as 99.999? It's not, right. It's not the same. So similarly, as you can see, the bar chart for UK's expenditure on perfumes is not exactly touching 150,000. Nor can the exact value be determined because it is too difficult to know with precision using this two-dimensional graph paper. Instead, we are supposed to approximate this value or use such grammatical words that clearly indicate that our computed value is a mere approximation at best, okay? Now, let's see different ways in which we can present this. UK's expenditure on perfumes was under 150,000 pounds sterling in 2010. It was less than 150,000. It was below 150,000. UK's expenditure on perfumes was approximately 150,000 pounds sterling in 2010. It was nearly 150,000. It was just under 150,000, slightly under 150,000, almost 150,000, close to well under, or UK's expenditure in perfumes was considerably less than 150,000. It depends on the relative height of the bar chart compared to the 150,000 line. So, it's your call, whatever you want to figure it out, right? So this is basically, fellas, how you sort of, go about these things, okay? I mean, this is exactly how I would go about that. So you just do what you got to do, and you just make sure that, you are comfortable with that. Anyways, so I hope you have understood that properly, okay? So these are some areas where students, I feel, are challenged, okay? And you just have to make sure that you use very scientific vocabulary, you are very precise in terms of, and very clear in terms of your terminologies, right? So as you can see, this was the background question statement. First paragraph of the report is introduction. You just paraphrase this background question statement in your own words. The chart above shows the expenditure of two countries on consumer goods in 2010. So what I've done is instead, this is my introduction, right? The chart, or you can even say, schematic, okay, or the graphical, sketch illustrates the amount of money spent on five consumer goods: cars, consumers, books, perfumes, and cameras in France and UK in 2010. So this follows is me having paraphrased my background question statement. If I want, I can just keep it till here and then move straight to my overview. Or what I can do is I can just add a few more lines. Once again, this is optional, but gives a good aesthetic appeal. The units are measured in pounds sterling. The consumer goods being the independent variable is compared on the x-axis, whereas the pound sterling being the dependent variable is compared on the y-axis. Okay, so this in and of itself is what our introduction of the report, us having paraphrased our background question statement and having added a few supporting details successfully. Now, you talk about the overview, right? Preferably put it in this first paragraph also, and always start with the word overall, because that is the clincher, gives the green signal that you talking about an overview. So as we just established, overall, the expenditure of the UK was higher than that of France. Both the French and the British spend the most money on cars. As you saw over here, both the French and the British, they're spending the most amount of money out of these five items on what? They're spending it on cars, right? While in the UK, the least amount of money was spent on perfumes compared to cameras in France. Okay, I'm sure you would agree. UK is in orange, so least is going for perfumes, and France is in blue, so the smallest bar is for what? Cameras. So there you go. Furthermore, the most significant difference in incurring expenditure between the two countries was on cameras, because when it comes to camera, the relative height of the bar charts for the two countries has the greatest amount of difference. It's not a difference, such a massive difference does not exist for the rest of the items for these particular countries. Okay, so just be a bit particular about this. So this, guys, is me having completed my first paragraph successfully, right? I've talked about my introduction. I've also elaborated and stressed on my overview. Now I come to my second paragraph, that is body paragraph, story writing. You just fill the details, right? But just make sure you use vocabulary that indicates that you're talking about these things on an approximate basis, okay? Not an exact basis. In terms of cars, people in the UK spent about £450,000 on this, as opposed to the French at 400,000. Similarly, the British expenditure was higher on books in the French, around £400,000 and £300,000 respectively. In the UK, expenditure on cameras, just over £350,000, was over double that of France, which was only £150,000. I should add around, right? Apologies. It's only around £150,000, right? After that, you can say that, on the other hand, the amount of money paid out for the remaining goods was higher in France. Neither of the countries spent much on perfumes, which accounted for almost £200,000 of expenditure in France, but under £150,000 in the UK. This is of 207 words. You have to write a minimum of 150. So 150, 200 is fine. The rest is up to you. Okay, but just make sure you write at least 150. So, and often, people often ask me, do we count each and every word? So I'm like, obviously, those of you who go for the paper-based exam, right? So you got these standard lines. So obviously, one approach is you start counting the words one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., etc. But that is a bit time-consuming. I would recommend that approach. You can just see on an average how many words you write in a line, because we normally write a fixed number of words, like 6, 7, 8, whatever. So you count the number of words you have in one line and just multiply that with the number of lines, and that gives you an approximate idea of how much you've written, whether you're going to write more or whether you've already written enough and you got to wrap it up. So let's just read the question one more time and then we'll wind it up, right? Question: the chart above, the bar chart above, shows the expenditure of two countries on consumer goods in 2010. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant, right? So, answer: the chart illustrates, or the bar chart illustrates, the amount of money spent on five consumer goods: cars, computers, books, perfumes, and cameras in France and UK in 2010. The units are measured in pounds sterling. The consumer goods being the independent variable is computed on the x-axis, whereas the pound sterling being the dependent variable is plotted on the y-axis. Overall, the expenditure of the UK was higher than that of France. Both the French and the British spent the most money on cars, while in the UK, the least amount of money was spent on perfumes compared to cameras in France. Furthermore, the most significant difference in incurring expenditure between the two countries was in cameras, right? Second paragraph, in terms of cars, people in the UK spend about £450,000. Second paragraph, body paragraph, right? In terms of cars, people in the UK spend about £450,000 on this, as opposed to the French at £400,000. Similarly, the British expenditure was higher on books than the French, around £400,000 and £300,000 respectively. In the UK, expenditure on cameras just over £350,000 was over double that of France, which was only around £150,000. On the other hand, the amount of money paid out on the remaining goods was higher in France. Neither of the countries spent much on perfumes, which accounted for almost £200,000 of expenditure in France, but under £150,000 in the UK. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is basically what a bar graph report looks like. Okay, so you can please go to the video. Let me know if you have any queries. Would love your comments, would love your feedback. And obviously, you can always reach out if you have any queries. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Assalamualaikum.